Today, we speak to the man behind the book, Hank, an Angel Dog, the moving and deeply personal memoir by Colonel David O. Scheiding, a retired U.S. Air Force officer, a fighter pilot, and author. Everyone, we are honored to have with us today Colonel David O. Scheiding.
Today, we're honored to welcome Colonel David O. Scheiding with a career defined by leadership, service, and resilience. He brings powerful lessons and inspiring stories that remind us what dedication and purpose truly mean. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today, and I'm very honored, Colonel Scheiding. Hello there.
Hi, Maria.
Thank you so much for taking time to be here in our podcast.
Sure, no problem.
All right. So, what first sparked your interest in aviation? I mean, like every little boy always wanted to be that. And how did that passion shape up your early years?
Well, just like you say, every little boy likes airplanes, I think. But
Yes.
I was born in Iowa, a small little town, central Iowa. Anytime I was outside or playing or something, see an airplane fly by, I'd just kind of stop and observe it and watch it, and just kind of amazed, that thinking about how that machine can fly like that. So that always kind of sparked my interest in it, and that held with me all the way through school, and even when I went to college. And I decided that I'd go to Iowa State University because they were in the top 10 schools at that time in engineering, and I signed up for aeronautical engineering. And that later was changed to aerospace engineering. But at that time, it was aeronautical engineering, and I decided I wanted to design airplanes. But as part of that, being at Iowa State, it was a state school, and as such, there was the ROTC. So the first 2 years in Iowa State, you had to sign up for ROTC. So I thought, well, airplanes, I'll sign up for the Air Force. So I did that, and then when I got a chance to sign up for advanced ROTC, I thought, well, if I could fly airplanes for the Air Force, then I think I would take the second 2 years and wind up with 4 years in ROTC and be commissioned. And so I said, but I got to pass that flight physical first. So I did that, passed that, and then I spent all 4 years in an ROTC. And then when I graduated, as a second lieutenant, I was off entering in the Air Force. So that's kind of how I got going and why I wound up in the Air Force.
Wow. Can you recall what was it like during your first flight, and what did it mean to you?
Yeah, it was amazing. It was everything I thought it would be. And my first flight, actually, I kind of had two of them. My very first flight was at Iowa State in the aeronautical college there. They had a Navion airplane, and when they would teach the aerodynamics course, they would actually take us out and fly. And what they would do, they'd put little tufts of yarn taped to the wings and the nose and everything else, and so we could actually observe the airflow over the wings and what happens if we were skidding or whatever, and even when we went into a stall, how the laminar flow would break from the wing and work from the back of the wing to the forward, and then you'd wind up in a stall. So to me, that was very interesting to be able to see aerodynamics in real life, how I was actually working on an airplane. And the second flight I had, which was important to me, was actually when I was at summer camp in ROTC, and I got a chance to get a flight in a jet aircraft. So the first jet airplane I got to fly in was a T-33, and that really just solidified everything. That's when I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot and everything else. So that's how I got to the point where I did.
And the training to be a fighter pilot must be different from the ordinary pilots that we have. So the path that led you to serve in Vietnam, what was it like?
The Air Force, being commissioned as a second lieutenant, the Air Force sent me to undergraduate pilot training, which at that time was I was sent to Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. There is a year-long training, and I flew in T-37s and T-38s. The T-38 had just replaced the T-33, so the airplane I had the first jet ride in was now out of the inventory, and T-38s were in there, and that's a supersonic airplane. And so went through that, and then when you come up to graduation after a year, the Air Force gives you an opportunity, depending upon how you rank in your class, your choice of assignment. And I was high enough in my class that I was able to essentially get my choice. And the thing is, though, at that time, the F-4 was just coming into the inventory, and they were putting new pilots in the back seats, which is now they put weapon systems operators in the back seat. So I didn't want to just go to the back seat in the F-4. I thought, well, I think I'll become an instructor pilot and gain some experience and some flying time and everything. And so I got my choice to be an instructor pilot, which then I wound up getting a T-37 slot down at Del Rio, Laughlin Air Force Base in Del Rio, Texas. I wanted a 38, but 37 is what I got. And I found out that, that was God's plan to get me a 37. And then what I did, I became an instructor pilot down there. And that's why I know that, God was kind of guiding me, and it was his plan, because the opportunities that I got at Laughlin in the 37 were experiences that I would never have gotten in a T-38. And so in, I guess it was 1968, I volunteered to go to Vietnam, but the Air Force says, no, we actually need you more in instructing pilots and creating pilots, and you can do that later. So I was on a list to go to Vietnam for 2 years before the base finally released me. And then I wound up getting when I volunteered, you could volunteer in 68, you could volunteer for the type aircraft you wanted, like fighters, airlift, bombers, whatever. I've, of course, volunteered for fighters. And as part of the fighter group is forward air controllers. And because the Army had a requirement that you have to be a fighter pilot to be a fact for them. But I got an O2 assignment with fighter qualifications. And so that's what kind of set me on the path to Vietnam, that I was headed to there. But it took them 2 years before they let me go.
All right. But you mentioned God earlier. What personal belief played in your journey, like both in the cockpit and right now, when you are writing in the writer's desk?
Yeah, being raised in a family, a very religious family up there, or in Iowa, which kind of set my path, that my belief in God and His Son Jesus, and that gave me as I progressed through, I became aware that the assignments I was getting was because of God. He wanted me to do certain things, and that's why I got a T-37 and T-38, because I needed the experience that I was going to need in Vietnam. And so he essentially guided me all my life, and he guided me through Vietnam, through my whole life, and flying airplanes and doing everything that I did. That it was my belief in God that I know that He was guiding my path.
So all that shaped understanding of courage and sacrifice when you were in Vietnam.
Right. Yeah. Because I saw what helped me over there too was being a FAC. I was stationed with the 101st Airborne, so I was stationed with the Army, and I couldn't believe some of the courage I seen out of those young helicopter pilots. They would do anything to. If you had a troops in contact situation, just unbelievable what the way they would do. In fact, we had one chopper pilot got shot down 3 times in one day, and that is, to me, I mean, I couldn't believe it. We had a troops in contact in the morning. He went out in a gunship and got shot down by about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. They got him back in. He wasn't hurt or anything. So he went to flight surgeon. Flight surgeon cleared him to go back. Brigade commander sent him out again. He got shot down again. They got him back around noon and
Oh,
did the same thing.
3 in a day.
Yeah. And then what he did, he went out the third time in
Mhm.
what we called a Charlie, a Huey, but for command and control. And he got shot down again. And he came back, and the brigade commander says, you can't fly anymore. I can't afford you flying. So that was kind of some of the courage I saw over there. And as far as on my viewpoint, or what on my
Mhm.
side, it was during the offensive in 62 or in 72 when I was supporting a Marine ground commander with the Arvin, and we were at the town of Antlock. I was flying 2 sorties a night and running the squadron during the day. But what I wound up doing one night, I came back after that was about the 5th night, and I was checking in with the crew chief. Hey, you got to get another airplane ready. I need to get back up there. And the crew chief says, well, we don't have any of them that are flyable. And I says, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we don't have one that has 2 good engines. And I said, well, do you have one that does have 2 good engines that isn't flyable? And
Okay.
he said, yeah, but it doesn't have an attitude indicator. Well, the attitude indicator is the prime flight instrument to fly the airplane. And I said, well, put rockets and fuel on it and I'll take it. So that kind of tells you what you have. You do what you have to do in combat. It wasn't a very smart idea on my part to take a
Yes.
airplane without an attitude indicator, but I did because that
That's a
Marine
crazy idea.
needed support. So that's kind of the courage and stuff that you see that comes out sometimes in war.
Is that one of the moments in your flying career that still gives you chills to recall? I mean, like, if you would decide right now, in that situation, would you still do the same and decide on the same things?
Yes, I would. I never questioned it. I just because I knew the weather was I wasn't going to be in clouds or anything, and there was so much ground fire going on. I knew I wouldn't have any trouble not keeping the airplane in the attitude I wanted it to. But no, I'd do it again. I had no qualms about that.
That's
That Marine needed me.
Yes, the bravery there you can just see. But any memorable, aside from that, any memorable moment in your flying career that you could recall when you were in Vietnam?
Yeah, I got a couple of them. Yeah, one of them was I'd only been in Vietnam about 16 days. I think something like that.
All
Hadn't
right.
been checked. Hadn't been checked out at night. Uh, and I hadn't been in certain areas where I was stationed with the Second Brigade.
Mm-hmm.
But my ALO, my air logistic officer, woke me up at 10 o'clock at night. And says, "Dave, you got to go fly." And he says, "We have a troops in contact up at Fort or Firebase Sarge." And I said, "Well, that's not even in our area." He said, "Yeah, I know, but the facts up in that area, they don't have anybody in crew rest. You're the only one that's in crew rest." And I said, "Well, you haven't checked me out, but I guess I'll go." And so I went, and for 4.5 hours, I put in 2 gunships, 4
Oh,
sets of F4s, and shot 175 howitzers with the Army until I broke the troops in contact till they decided they didn't want to overrun that fire base. So that night, I checked myself at night, and I saved those guys' lives on the
amazing.
fire base. And the second one has to do with that Marine,
Oh,
where yeah, and this one really brings chills to me. But it was on about the like I say, about the 5th, 6th, 7th night, something like that.
mm-hmm.
They were getting pounded pretty badly, and he comes up on the radio and he says, "Chico 1-0, hit my position. They're coming through the wire. I can't tell if it's your ordnance or theirs. Just hit my position. My wife's in Bangkok. Tell her I love her." And the radio
Oh,
goes dead. And I thought, wow, that really hit home that just how
mm,
vicious war is. So well, I had a bunch of fighters still stacked up, so I wiped out the fire base, and we got rid of the rest of the fighters by taking out where they had been looking for me with these big spotlights at night, because if they could shoot the fact down, they wouldn't get bombed. And so I just wiped out 6 blocks of Handlock and then went home. 3 days later, my first sergeant comes in to me and says, "Sir, there's a major out here looking for you." And I said, "Well, bring him in." And this major comes in. He was covered with red dirt. He was in a poncho and he had a red beard, and he looked terrible. And he comes in to me and he says, "Are you Chico 10?" That was my call sign.
Okay.
I said, "Yeah, I'm Chico 10." He says, "I want to shake your hand because I'm the guy that you saved up at Handlock."
Wow.
And that was just tremendous there. And I looked him in the eye and I said, "Now you can tell your wife you love her." And he got this biggest smile. And that still gives me chills to think about that bond that essentially we created there. And I don't know his name. He doesn't know my name. He just knew my call sign.
So he was the guy who said that, "Tell my wife in Bangkok that I love her." Was it the
Exactly.
guy? Wow.
Yeah.
He comes back to you, and you all thought that he was gone, and then he comes back all disheveled and everything.
Yeah.
Wow. But just curious, you were in war with whom at
With
that
that,
time?
yeah. Well, the South. We were supporting the South Vietnamese fight the North Vietnamese and the guerrilla types. They had what we called the VC, Viet Cong. We called them Charlie. So that they were, of course, trying to take over the South Vietnam, and we were there. The government was there, had us there to stop them from doing that.
Well, thank you so much. Then Vietnamese would be so thankful for all that you did there. But is this one of the silent memories that you carry? I mean, like veterans speak of that, the silent memories. So would you care to share some of it if you have?
Yeah, I can do that, but I wouldn't call silent memories there. I had silent years because when I came back from Vietnam after my years of time and everything, my wife stayed in Del Rio while I was in Vietnam because that's where we had lived before I left, and she was going to drive over to pick me up. It was 10 o'clock at night, and I arrived in San Antonio here, and as I was walking out from the deplane from the gate out there, walking down to the terminal area, this hippie-looking guy was walking out towards the gate, and he's glaring at me. And I thought, well, what's wrong with this guy? And when he got right beside me, he spit in front of me.
Oh.
And I thought, what in the world is going on? And I thought, well, we'll see. And went home. I didn't say anything. I met my wife. We went home. I didn't say anything to anybody. The Air Force was sending me to the University of Denver to get a master's degree in engineering after my assignment in Vietnam. And so I got there, and then I'm sitting in class and thinking, how can I compete with these young kids in engineering and so forth? And I'm watching Walter Cronkite, badmouth the war on the TV, and I watched John Kerry throw his medals over the White House fence, and then I watched Jane Fonda set on an aircraft gun, one that was similar that fired at me in Cambodia, and I thought, this didn't mean a thing. And I thought, how do I even fit into this situation? And then what happened, I got all my medals from over there. A student in my class handed them to me. And I thought, well, these things don't mean anything. And so what I did was, I didn't know how I fit in. I just shut down. So I essentially had more silent years. And this was in 70, 72, 73 time period. And I didn't talk about any Vietnam at all with anybody for that whole length of time because of that. And so that, and I really didn't until my wife in 2009, she bought a book called Back from War by Lieutenant Lee Alley. and it's a compilation of stories from 20 different guys just like me. And I could see myself in every one of those stories. In fact, what I did with my medals when I got them, I threw them in a file cabinet in the closet in the bottom drawer. And a guy in this book did the same thing I did. And so I thought, I'm not alone. And so that's when I first was able to start talking about Vietnam and so forth. And so it was 2009 essentially before I came home mentally, even though I did physically. I came home in 72.
Even when you were there, you had those silent tears
Yeah, I just,
together with your silent memories, but only until 2009 that
that's right.
you're able to talk about it. But
Right.
you were featured in National Geographic documentary. How did that experience unfold? And what impact did it have in your life? When was this, the National Geographic? Was
That
it
was in,
past 2009 or just before?
no, it was, that was in 1975.
Oh,
Uh, what happened was when I left Vietnam, the Air Force sent me to get my master's degree in engineering. And
uh-huh.
then I did. I got it in civil engineering. My bachelor's was in aerospace engineering. Well, then they sent me to Kelly Air Force Base after I graduated with my master's. And I became the lead structural engineer on the C-5 fleet. And so essentially, my assignment to AFIT to get my master's degree in engineering precipitated my return to Vietnam. Because when I
Mm,
see, and this is where I think God had all this as part of His plan for my life.
yeah.
So I get to Kelly Air Force Base here. I work my way up to the lead engineer, structural engineer on the C-5 fleet for the Air Force. And on 4 April 1975, that's when the South Vietnam was falling. We had taken all the combat troops out in 1973, but we still had advisors over there and everything. But on 4 April 1975, what happened was the North started another offensive in February of that year of 75. And essentially, they used the same war plan that I had defeated in 1972. So they were taking over the country. And what happened is our government turned down any funding to help them, to assist them. So they were delivering, the C-5 was delivering the last 12 105 howitzers to the ARVN, South Vietnamese Army. And on the way out, they unloaded those howitzers. Then the government decided that they would remove. What happened when the 73, when all the combat troops out, a lot of the women that had got pregnant by our soldiers, they had abandoned all their kids and the children.
Yeah.
And so what they did, our government decided to bring those orphans out of there. So they loaded them all on this airplane, and they called it Operation Baby Lift. And the airplane took off, and then what happened, it was on climb out, it had a massive explosive decompression, blew out the aft ramp and a few other things, and then the airplane crashed. And in Vietnam, it couldn't get all the way back to the base. It just crashed out in a rice paddy. So now and then what happened then was the 4-star commander of MAC that owned the bird wanted 2 engineers from Kelly to go with the accident board to investigate the accident. So I wound up, myself and another engineer, a mechanical engineer, we went back to Vietnam to investigate that accident. And the accident board itself had a 2-star general in charge. And the 2-star general, well, there's 34, 35 people of us on the accident board. But we were collecting all the parts and everything else, and we were able to retrieve the part of the airplanes that actually wound up in the South China Sea when the accident occurred at 23,000 feet. The Navy found it, and we got enough parts together that and we knew that we had a problem with the aft ramp locking system. And now this 2-star general, he wanted to call the cause of the accident design deficiency, because they were using a single actuator to lock all 7 locks. It's an adequate system, but not the best. Well, myself and the other mechanical engineer, and at that time I was also a Texas licensed professional engineer. We couldn't go along with that because the evidence showed on that what the parts that recovered from the bottom of the sea, that the locks had actually unlocked them, the first 3 locks. And the only way that could happen is if that system wasn't rigged properly. So what we would do, we would raise our hand. He was the 2-star general was a big guy, about 6'5", and 2 stars on his shoulders. He was very intimidating. And the problem was, when he was a colonel, he actually he was the system program officer, and he wound up procuring the C5 for the Air Force. Well, as part of that, there was cost and weight overruns going on. And so they gave Lockheed an incentive of $300 for every pound that they could save. Well, Lockheed says, well, we can cut out 7, go from 7 actuators to 1, and we can save all that weight. So he had to approve that. But once you do that, it takes 8 hours to rig the system if you disturb any parts in that system. And they had a maintenance guy. And now that he's a 2-star general, he's in charge of all the maintenance for Mac. Mm-hmm. So when they re-rigged the system at Travis, they just put they took out 2 tie rods that were connecting the locks themselves, put them back in, and didn't re-rig the system. And so what happened then, the airplane, once the forces from pressurization start building up, it actually unlocked 3 of the locks, which then exceeded the structural limit and everything. So we said the cause of the problem of this accident was maintenance. And he didn't want to do that because, he was the one that now in charge of maintenance, of all maintenance for C5. So he says, no, it was design deficiency. We'd go in and he'd go to the blackboard of this monthly or our daily meeting at 9:00, write design deficiency. He'd turn around, either myself, the other guy would raise their hand and say, sir, we can't support that. It's maintenance. And he'd just chew us out and then dismiss the meeting. That went on for a week, and then he kicked us off the board. So we got kicked off the board. I had to go back to our 2-star general here at Kelly and tell him, hey, we got kicked off because we didn't support him on what he wanted to call the cause of the accident.
Yeah.
And he says, well, can you prove it? And we said, yeah, we can. So we was able to duplicate the accident as maintenance to within 300 feet when it actually occurred. So we wrote our descending report because we told the 2-star that if he kicked us off, we'd write a descending report to his board. And he said, do what you have to do. So we did. We duplicated it. Our 2-star signed it. That went into the Air Force safety for evaluation as what the real cause of it was. And after 6 months, the Air Force safety came back and said, we accept the San Antonio position as the cause of the accident. That 2-star general got fired, retired, and had a week to get off the base. So then what happened there, I was able to complete my career because at that time I was just a major. The other major had enough time. He retired because he didn't know if we'd win or not. So that left me with I guess I wouldn't call it problem, but I had to defend the Air Force against all the lawsuits after that.
Wow.
But then what happened then was when I get a call after I retired, and I was running my own business then. This Canadian firm says, the National Geographic Air Disaster Series wants us to make a film on Operation Baby Lift to go over that accident. And I didn't know if I could talk to them or not because I didn't know which report they actually had. Then when they started reading the recommendations, I said, "Oh, yep, that's my report. I guess I can talk to you." They came down and interviewed me for 9 hours.
Wow!
And then they put
9 hours.
9 hours of interview, and then they took that and made that. It was about a 42 minute video that for air disasters, in which I was in the second half mostly because of the first half. They just showed how the accident actually occurred, and then they had somebody portraying me in the investigation out there in the first half, and then I was in the second half with the comments that explain what was going on. So that's how I got into the National Geographic thing on Operation Baby Lift.
Operation Baby. Just a little bit curious though. You took all the kids, but their mothers went with them, or they were just left in Vietnam?
The mothers abandoned the kids, and so these came out of all the orphanages that they had over there.
Oh,
So they just abandoned them. Yeah, and
got
what we had on that airplane, we had a bunch of babies, and we had we had 102 older kids that were down on the cargo floor. And then we had all the babies were up in the troop compartment. The C-5 has a 70-seat troop compartment. We had all the babies up there, and there were 2 to 3 babies in each seat. And what happened was, when the airplane crashed, it essentially ground off the fuselage itself, and then the troop compartment was sitting on the rice paddy. And so the babies survived, and the cockpit broke off, and so the crew survived, but everybody that was on the cargo floor, which included secretaries from the embassy and all the kids and everything else, they didn't survive. But yeah, it was bad. So we didn't know how many was really on there, because they were just trying to get people on there as fast as they could, because the country was starting to fall. And as a matter of fact, it fell 3 days after we left. That left the country. They got overran. But those were all babies that had been abandoned.
But that whole experience, the National Geographic documentary, what impact did it have in your life?
Well, for one thing, the next 10 years, I had to defend the Air Force against all the lawsuits that were occurring. And at that time, it was like $75 million worth of lawsuits. So back in the late 70s and 80s, that was a lot of money back in those days. And so I had to defend the Air Force. I was the only one in the Air Force now that had
everybody resigned.
Yeah, everybody was gone or fired.
Or fired.
Yeah, so that impacted my life the next 10 years while I was in the Air Force. Even when I was flying F-111s, having to go to the Pentagon anytime one of those lawsuits had come up, and I'd have to defend the Air Force. So I did that. That's why it had a major impact upon my life.
I see this in documentaries and movies sometimes, but I can't believe I'm talking to someone like you who was really in action. So I'm just so privileged to be talking to you right now, Colonel. Anyway, looking back, what would you say has been your proudest achievement as a pilot?
Well, I was very fortunate. I was a squadron commander in F-111 for a squadron, so I had a responsibility as squadron commander. But probably the biggest achievement that I have is when I was a captain in Vietnam during the 72 offensive. I had the largest combat squadron in Vietnam at that time as a captain, and that's a lieutenant colonel's job. And the fact that we were able to stop the 72 offensive, and I did it. I was working with the CIA, and we did it when we wiped out the Bon Son River Bridge, which stopped them from getting a seaport, so they couldn't feed their troops. And after 2 months of fighting, they were running out of supplies. And when I stopped them from being able to do that, they quit. About a week later, they went home. And thankfully, I was just about through. But doing that is probably my proudest achievement in the Air Force. But even though flying F-111 is a lot of fun, and I flew it for 7 years. So
wow.
But being a fact, saving lives, saving that Marine, saving those troops up on Firebase Sarge, and stopping the 72 offensive, to me that's kind of the epitome of my life.
True. Well, after your military career, what inspired you to transition into writing and write about Hank? And I guess you have other books as well.
Yeah, I've written 3 books. As a matter of
Hmm.
fact, what happened there was after I got out of the Air Force, I worked as an engineer and started my own business and everything. And my mother-in-law had cancer, and she got real sick and everything. So we had gone up. She was up in Iowa by Council Bluffs, a small town called. She at the time she lived in Council Bluffs, but we went up to because she wasn't doing well at all. And when we got there, my father-in-law, he was a farmer and everything, and a real good guy. And he was always good with animals and everything. But they had moved in town, and he didn't have any dogs or anything at that time. And on the day that my mother-in-law actually passed, what happened was their son had flown into Omaha, and because of his mother was sick. And when my father-in-law went over to pick him up at the airport, they stopped by the kennels in Omaha, and
Hmm.
they thought, well, we're going to get a dog for Herman. That's his name, and they found this dog. He was about a 60-pound dog. He was only about 6, 7 months old, and he was like part boxer and some kind of hunting dog. But they got him, brought him home. That afternoon, my mother-in-law passed away. So
Oh.
we got Hank on the day my mother-in-law passed, and so Herman, he was real good with dogs and animals, but Hank, it became obviously that somebody had just beaten him terribly with brooms and whatever, because every time if you picked up a broom or a shovel or a fork or a rake or something, he'd just
Uh-huh.
cower down. And so what Herman would do, he'd take him out in the backyard. He'd put a broom on his shoulder. He'd walk around for 2 or 3 hours, letting him know that this dog was not going to get hurt, get beaten. And we wound up naming him Hank. And Herman had Hank for about in fact, you can kind of see, here's the cover of it. Uh,
Oh.
look, look at that dog's body language looking up there at Hank. He
Yeah.
worshiped Hank. You could just tell it there. And so Herman had him for, like I say, 5.5 years. Then we had to put him in an assisted facility. And I told him earlier that if he ever couldn't take care of Hank, we'd be glad to do that. So we took care of Hank, and with us, he was the same way. And so we had him for 9.5 years. And during that time period, he had stage 3 lymphoma, thyroid cancer, and a stroke. And he
Oh.
overcame all of that. And so I thought, this is such a remarkable dog. So that's why I called him an angel dog. I says, I'm going to write a book about him. And so that's why I wrote my Hank and Angel Dog, was to honor him.
All right. So Hank was your transition
Yes,
into
he
writing.
right. And I did that just because, I the dog was he was like a perfect dog. He didn't bark, he didn't chew on things, and he was just an awesome dog. I never seen anything like it. In fact, he was the smartest dog that I've ever seen. And Herman said the same thing. And so that's what kind of got me into writing that one. And
Mm.
then I wrote that in, I think, 2015. But then, like I say, after my wife bought the book back from war, I got to thinking, well, my wife kept saying, why don't you do something so that you can leave something for your kids, to know what you did in Vietnam and so forth. And so what I did is I went over, I was running my business at that time. I went over and made a CD tape. We're just giving some of the things that, well, what we're talking about now. But then I got to thinking, well, they probably can't even find a CD player anymore that play a CD tape. So I said, well, I'll just write a book. So that's when I wrote The Long Return. And what that is, it was about my time in Vietnam. And so I
Mm.
wrote that uh, essentially about all the different experiences I had. And I wrote that in 2016. And it was the reason why I wrote that, it was very therapeutic. And I know I've handed my book out to a number of people that had been in Vietnam, and they felt the same way, that it was therapeutic for them to see how I was able to overcome the way we were treated coming back. In fact, the first time I got thanked for my time in service was in 2009 after I had my wife bought that book. That's the first person that thanked me for my service in 2009.
So you said it's therapeutic, the second book that you wrote. So
Right.
you were able to express whatever you felt then during your silent years.
That's right. And then my third book,
Hmm.
uh, it's called, I titled it Don't Fly Today. And this is where I know God was guiding me, because I was in Vietnam during the uh, 72 offensive. I was getting ready to take off one day, and I was the ops officer at that time period. So I was taking off for just a regular mission. And as I started to taxi out to the end of the runway, a strange feeling that came over me, one I've never had before or since. And the strange feeling came over me. And then this voice in my head said, "Don't fly today." And I ignored it, went a little bit farther. Voice got a little bit louder, said, "Don't fly today." And I again ignored it. And I got to the very end of the runway, and the voice, he yelled at me. He says, "Don't fly today." And the light bulb went on. I thought, God's talking to me. I'm not supposed to fly today. So I turned around and went back, and I didn't fly that day. Didn't have to tell anybody because I was the ops officer, but God intervened there and kept me from flying that day. And I know he saved my life that day.
But
And
what
I know,
happened later that day?
well, I just didn't fly. Then the next day I went to fly, and the
Ah,
only thing, but that was the day that I realized that everything that had been happening to me was because of God's plan for me. So then in 2020, I decided that I'm going to write another book and call it Don't Fly Today, and actually go through my whole life and document all the empirical evidence, how he gave me a T-37 instead of a T-38,
hmm.
instead of a fighter, he gave me an O2, and everything that he did. And, and all he wanted me to do these things and be on that accident board, because I think he wanted to be sure that the cause of that accident was defined properly. And so I think he got me on that board, and he took care of them all my life that way. So I named this book Don't Fly Today, and it's about my whole life, about the empirical evidence, how God guides people for his plan that he has for us. And but it was difficult for me to write it, though, because I started, and it wasn't going like I wanted it to do. And so I kind of quit. I quit, and after a couple of
Oh,
months, 'cause it wasn't working right. And then about 6 months later, I thought, well, maybe I'll try again. So I tried again. Again, it didn't work. So I quit. And then it seems like about 6 months later, and that's why there went from 2016 to 2020.
2020.
God says, it essentially led me to try one more time on the Don't Fly Today. So I did, and everything just flowed. I cut and paste, and everything just flowed the way he wanted it.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I finished that book. And so that's why my strong belief is because of the way I was born or raised by my family and everything, and went through my whole life dictating, outlining and depicting all the different things that he did. He gave me what I needed, not what I wanted, and it was for
Right.
his purpose.
So from the three published works, I see that the last one today was the most challenging to write.
Yes, yes, it was very challenging. And so I know God wanted me to write that. So he has a purpose. I figure evidently somebody will buy this book, and that may convert them to be a Christian. And I know that's the purpose that he wanted me to write that book. So I can live with that.
Oh, yes. You've lived through moments that, most people only read about. I told you that a while back. But what's the most important life lesson those moments have taught you?
Well, essentially, you know, believe in God, listen to him, and he will take care of us, take care of you. And so me, a life lesson was the that I realized that God's in control, that we're not. If you let him. Of course, evil's obviously apparent in the world, but if you, I want people to realize that God, God is real, and atheists, he does exist. So I think it's very important that they realize that the power of God and what He can do and His Son. So that's kind of what I want them to get out of, the stuff, all of them. With Hank, I know it was God's plan to
Mhm.
have Hank be at the shelter because he had gotten lost, I think, because of a thunderstorm, and then he got
Oh,
picked up. So he was there at that facility the day we were looking for him, and he contributed so much to our lives, both to Herman and my wife and me after that, and then the long return. He instead of giving me a fighter, he gave me an O2,
mhm.
and he wanted me there to do what I did as a captain because we had no rank in the forward air controllers. They were all young pilots, and so I was there to take care of that. I was there for the offensive in '72, working with the CIA. We actually stopped the war there, so he wanted me for that. But later on, he gave me a fighter, and he gave it to me for 7 years. So I flew the F-111 for 7 years, got over 1,200 hours in it. And in Vietnam, I wound up with 630 hours of combat time and 317 sorties. So, but that's a lot of sorties in the O2, which is a Cessna Skymaster push-pull type. And we only flew about at 1,500 feet and about 120 knots. So, yeah. So it's all God's plan, and he will do that. And another thing felt was when I retired from the Air Force. Actually, he's the one that got me the civil engineering degree because the Air Force never asked me what degree I wanted,
Mhm.
and so they sent me up to the University of Denver. So when I got there, I said, "By the way, what field am I in?" And he says, "Oh, well, you're in civil engineering." I said, "Oh, okay." So I thought, well, and then so I get a master's in civil engineering. They gave me a year and a half up there, and I only needed a year. So then they said, "What do you want to do with the other 6 months?" I said, "Well, I guess I'll take the first year of the MBA program." So I did that, took that, and then God sent me to Kelly as a structural engineer on the C5. So
Mhm.
that put me in line with that. But then while I'm at Kelly, I got my Texas professional engineering license. So now I got a BS in aerospace engineering, an MS in civil engineering, and now an MBA degree. So I was able to complete that as well as getting maybe a licensed professional engineer. So, but God wanted me in these different places, then I could take care of the accident and all that stuff. But then when I retired, I went out looking for a job, and I looked at this article in the paper says we're looking for an office manager that has a MS in civil engineering, a
Wow.
license PE, and it would be very desirable if he has an MBA. Well,
Wow,
so
the ad was talking to you.
yeah, so God took care of that. So I went to there and they hired me on the spot.
Who
So
wouldn't?
yeah, so I did that, and then that company got bought out by another company that
Mhm.
hired me. And the thing is, they were a lab company over in England that bought this engineering firm I was working with. And then what's happening? They bought another company that had an office that I was with the company that they bought. So now
Mhm.
we got two offices in the same city, owned by the same people. And didn't know what was actually going to happen, but they finally decided, well, I was working in the environmental field at that time, more so than the geotechnical field. And the other office was the opposite. They had more geotechnical and very little environmental. So they kept us both. But then what happened after 3 years, their whole model, the companies that bought the two companies, was rapid growth so they could keep the stock prices high. Well, after 3 years, I get this, my boss up in Austin calls me and says, you need to put in $250,000 in your P&L statement. And I said, well, where am I going to get that? And he says, well, just, figure, add up your proposals you got, and they call it work in progress. And I says, that sounds just like Enron, the Enron accounting procedures that people were using. Mm-hmm. And I says, I can't do that. I'm a licensed engineer. And I says, you are too. And he said, oh no, just put it in there. And his office was up in Austin. And so I told my admin person, I says, prepare the P&L, leave out the 250. I'm going to hand deliver it to him. So she did that. I took it up there, handed it to him. I said, the 250,000 is not in there in the profit and loss because it doesn't exist. And that's Enron procedures. And that doesn't follow the GAAP, the general accounting principles. So I'm not going to do it because I'm a licensed engineer and so are you. And you shouldn't be doing it. And he accepted it. Before I could get back to San Antonio, he fired me. So they called me. I was fired. I said, okay. So what I did was myself and another one of the guys, we started our own business. And right. An environmental consulting business is what we did. And here again, this is where God comes in again, because we now we're out in the capital business, industry, capitalism, and it's tough starting a new business. And we started this one, and for the first 3 years, the first year in particular, it was really tough. It was really tough, but I would say there was probably 4 or 5 times during that first year we didn't have enough money in the bank to pay payroll, and I wouldn't sleep well that night, right. And I would pray and ask for help, and the next day, and like I say, this happened 3 or 4 times, maybe 5, something like that. But my business office, she would go out to the mailbox in the morning on that Friday. We always paid at the end of the day after 2 weeks, and I would watch her face when she'd open up the mailbox. She'd pull out and she'd start going through there, and she'd start smiling if she saw checks in there. And God makes sure that we had money to meet payroll. We never missed a payroll.
Amazing.
And I ran that business for 18 years and then retired. And like I say,
who's running it now?
My partner. I sold out to him. Oh. And it's still in business. And we started that business in 1992. So, and it's still in business. So God was behind all that, and I know it. So I give him all the credit for it. But he took care of me, and I tell you why is because in 2014, my wife is diagnosed with dementia, and now I was taking care of her all the way up until 2023. Then the doctor said that I needed to put her in a facility because I wasn't getting any sleep or anything. And even I had a nurse the last year that I was taking care of her at the home. Uh-huh. And even between us, we couldn't do everything to, keep track of her and everything. She fell 12 times in 1 month. And then the doctor says, well, you need to put her in a memory care facility. Otherwise she's going to outlive you, because it was starting to impact my life. And so I moved her into a facility, and I know that that's why God brought me back from Vietnam and all the other stuff. He wanted me here to be able to take care of my wife, and so that's what I'm doing now. So God had a full plan for me and my wife, and now I'm able to take care of her or have her taken care of in that facility. And so that's kind of where it's all evolved to where we're at now. And another thing, since I wrote those 3 books, I wasn't going to write anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that my literary agent encouraged me to write a memoir. And
True.
so, yeah, because the way it was with the Long Return has, kind of my military, and the Don't Fly Today has my retirement and stuff. So it's kind of memorized, but it's in 2 books. And so he says, I want you to, combine everything into one memoir. And so by the end of this week, I will have finished that.
Wow.
And so we'll be probably trying to put that out for publication. So then I'll have 4 books.
Wow, I think that's a great idea, putting it all together in one book from the 3 books that you had. But you've been honored with inclusion in Marquis Who's Who Lifetime Achievement Award. What does this recognition mean to you personally and professionally?
Well, to me, that's a real honor. I know, back in the 80s when I was squadron commander of the 111s, I was in Who's Who in the West a couple of times, and in another aviation book, I was recognized that way. But in 2025, Who's Who recognized me again for Who's Who, and then they recognized me for the Albert Newson's Lifetime Achievement Award. And to me, that's a big honor. I thought that's something else. And the way I kind of look at that, it's very humbling for somebody to, give me that kind of an award. But the way I see it, I kind of compare it to like the actors out in Hollywood when they get their star on the Walk of Freedom or
Walk of Fame.
Walk of Fame, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of feel it's the same way that Who's Who would recognize me with that. That's just as important as their star on the Walk of Fame. So that's the way I view it. That it's a tremendous honor, and but again, it's all because of God.
Yeah,
He got it in life.
you have an incredible life, and that award, you deserve every bit of it.
Well, like I'll accept it, but it's like I say, it's very humbling to me. But I know it's because that's what God wanted me to do all the time through my life. So I was just a vessel, and He was doing His work through me. That means more to me too. So.
Right. Colonel, I may have kept you longer than planned, but your stories were worth every moment. And I loved Hank. As a dog mom, I couldn't agree more about Furry Angels and all your other books. And this incoming book, the memoir, I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for being here in my podcast today.
I appreciate that, Maria, and I enjoyed talking with you. It's always good, as far as I'm concerned, to recognize the work of God in this world, because we got too much evil now.
True. Thank you so much, Colonel. That wraps up our conversation with Colonel David O. Scheiding. His journey reminds us that leadership, service, and resilience are not just words, but values we can live by every day. We hope you found inspiration in his story, and thank you for listening. And be sure to join us next time for another powerful conversation. Until then, take care and keep striving for excellence. This has been Maria. Have a great day.